I never thought a backyard party could feel like a battle. But here I was, standing in the middle of my own yard, staring at the string lights I'd just hung, wondering if tonight would even happen. I had been dreaming about this party for weeks. Friends, music, laughter spilling into the warm evening air. But apparently in this neighborhood, dreams came with footnotes, restrictions, and an HOA breathing down your neck. The first warning arrived like a punch in the gut. A letter with a perfectly official envelope stamped and threatening. I tore it open, heart thudding, and read the words that made my blood boil. No more than 20 guests, no amplified music, no alcohol, and absolutely no party unless the HOA personally approved every detail. My backyard, my home, suddenly wasn't mine. I sank into my chair, the weight of absurdity pressing down, thinking this can't be real. I could feel anger rising, hot and sharp, but also something else, a spark of defiance. You see, I've never been the kind to back down when someone tries to tell me I can't live my life. And this was my life, my joy, my right to celebrate. The thought of canceling my party, of disappointing my friends who were whispering about how fun it would be, made my chest tighten. I wasn't about to let that happen. So I did what anyone in my situation would do. I fought with my brain. I opened my laptop, poured myself a strong cup of coffee, and dove into the rules, the ordinances, the tiny, dusty paragraphs of legalese that most people would never touch. Hours passed, my eyes burning, hands cramping, but then I found it. A loophole. A tiny, shining loophole buried deep in the city's event permit rules. If a property owner applied for a permit when an HOA event was canceled or disputed, they could legally take over the permit. I felt my heart race. Could it be true? Could the very organization trying to crush my fun actually become my ticket to victory? I could almost hear the HOA members now, fuming in their perfectly decorated boardroom, wondering how in the world I'd gotten a step ahead. But I couldn't celebrate just yet. The HOA wasn't going to roll over quietly. They were like a pack of watchdogs, trained to sniff out any deviation from their rules. One mistake, one forgotten form, one late email, and my victory would crumble before it even started. I had to be careful. Every detail, every signature, every I dotted and T crossed had to be perfect. I sat back looking around my backyard, imagining it transformed. Lights twinkling, laughter echoing, music filling the air, neighbors dancing, and yes, the HOA watching helplessly from the edges, powerless to stop what I'd legally created. The vision made my chest swell with excitement, and I smiled, knowing the first step toward my triumph had already begun. Night fell and the quiet darkness made my plan feel even more thrilling. I moved decorations, rehearsed my arguments, and ran through every scenario in my head. What if the HOA tried to block the permit last minute? What if they showed up to intimidate me? I was ready for all of it. I would not just throw this party, I would win. And more than that, I would prove a point. Nobody, not even a self-righteous HOA, could control me if I knew my rights and had the courage to fight. By the time the first faint light of morning crept over the rooftops, the backyard looked chaotic, boxes everywhere, lights half-strung, the smell of fresh-cut grass. But to me, it was perfect. It wasn't just preparation, it was anticipation. Every second of planning had brought me closer to one thing, a night that would be unforgettable, not just for the fun, but for the satisfaction of turning their rules against them, legally, cleverly, and with style. Tomorrow the game would start. Tomorrow the HOA would discover that sometimes the rules aren't a cage, they're an opportunity. And I was ready to take them all by storm. The next morning I woke up with a mix of excitement and dread. The sun was barely peeking over the rooftops, and already my mind was racing with possibilities. The letter from the HOA still sat on the kitchen counter, staring at me like a challenge. I poured a cup of coffee, hoping it would calm my nerves, but it didn't. If anything, it sharpened my focus. This wasn't just about a party anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about showing that I wouldn't be bullied into submission. I reread their rules, every line more absurd than the last. No music past 8 p.m., maximum of 20 guests, a permit that only they could approve. It felt like they were trying to cage joy itself, and suddenly I felt a surge of determination. They thought they had the power, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. This was my fight, and I was ready to win. I called a few neighbors, the ones I trusted, just to gauge their excitement. They were buzzing, whispering about how daring this would be. Some laughed nervously, unsure if the HOA would really escalate, while others were practically bouncing with anticipation. Their energy fueled me. I couldn't let them down. Every plan, every step had to be perfect because this wasn't just my party anymore. It was everyone's chance to feel free in this suffocating neighborhood. But even as I talked to them, doubt crept in. What if the HOA sent someone over today? What if they tried to revoke the permit before I even had a chance to apply? The thought made my stomach twist. I paced back and forth in my living room, imagining the worst-case scenarios: letters, threats, complaints, fines. My heartbeat accelerated with every imagined confrontation. I had to be ready. Every move had to be calculated, precise, unassailable. That's when I remembered the loophole I had found the night before. My pulse quickened at the thought. If I could file for the permit before the HOA had a chance to react, the game would change completely. Suddenly, the rules that were meant to stop me could become my weapon. My fingers itched to type, my mind racing through every detail. I envisioned the city clerk approving my application and the HOA sitting there, fuming and powerless, while I smiled knowing I had beaten them at their own game. I spent hours preparing the paperwork, triple-checking every line, every signature, every requirement. I didn't want any mistakes. Mistakes would mean failure, and failure wasn't an option. I even practiced my conversation with the city officials, anticipating questions, objections, and doubts. I imagined myself calm, confident, unshakable, and unstoppable. Meanwhile, whispers started spreading through the neighborhood. A few curious neighbors peeked over the fences, watching me move boxes, string lights, and decorations as if nothing had changed. They didn't know the full story yet, but they could feel the tension in the air. Some gave thumbs up, some shook their heads in disbelief, but all of them were silently rooting for me. That quiet support made my chest tighten with gratitude. I wasn't alone in this fight. By late afternoon, I had submitted the permit application. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, but I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. Now all I could do was wait. The HOA could try to interfere, they could try to intimidate, but legally I was ahead. And as I stood in my backyard, surveying the half-hung lights and scattered decorations, I realized something important. This was bigger than a party. This was about standing up, about refusing to be silenced, about turning fear and rules into opportunity and triumph. As evening approached, I caught myself smiling at the thought of the HOA's reaction. They would never see it coming. Tomorrow, when the permit was officially mine, the entire neighborhood would witness the shift. And in that anticipation, in that quiet moment before the storm, I felt alive. Because tonight, the battle had only just begun, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, bouncing between excitement, nerves, and a tiny spark of mischief I hadn't felt in years. The letter from the HOA sat on my nightstand like a silent challenge, daring me to quit, to back down, to play it safe. But safe had never been my style. Not when something I cared about, my home, my joy, my party, was at stake. I pulled out my laptop again, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark bedroom. I began reading, scrolling through city codes, permit regulations, and HOA bylaws, every word blurring together after hours of research. Most people would have given up by now, but I felt alive. Each line, each tiny loophole felt like a secret key waiting to be found. And then I found it. Buried deep in the city's event permit rules was a clause that seemed almost too perfect to be true. If a property owner applied for a permit for a personal event when an HOA event had been canceled or disputed, they could legally take over the permit. My pulse quickened. I read it again. And again. My hands shook, my heart hammered. Could it really be that easy? Could the very organization trying to crush my fun actually hand me the keys to victory? I had to be careful. One wrong move and this loophole would vanish, or worse, be contested. But the thought of finally outsmarting the HOA made my stomach flutter with excitement. I imagined the board members, sitting in their perfectly air-conditioned office, imagining they were in control, while I was quietly turning their rules against them. The thrill of it made me grin like a kid plotting a prank that nobody would ever forget. I spent the rest of the night planning, packing, and imagining every possible scenario. What if they tried to challenge the permit? What if a neighbor tipped them off or the city clerk questioned my application? Every detail mattered. I wrote checklists, triple-checked forms, and rehearsed my explanations over and over in front of the mirror. I became obsessed with perfection, knowing this moment was too important to gamble away. By the early hours of the morning, exhaustion threatened to take over, but I pushed through. I imagined the party in my mind, Lights twinkling in the backyard, music flowing, laughter echoing, neighbors dancing, all while the HOA stood on the sidelines, powerless to stop what I had legally created. The vision was intoxicating. I felt a surge of pride, knowing that my careful planning, my determination, and my refusal to give up could turn a simple party into a statement, a victory. But this wasn't just about me. I thought about the neighbors who had quietly supported me, who had whispered their excitement and encouraged me to fight. Their hope fueled me. I realized that my fight wasn't just personal. It was about reclaiming a sense of freedom and joy in a place that seemed designed to take it away. Every clause I studied, every form I filled, every careful decision I made was a step toward giving us all a chance to celebrate without fear. The sun began to rise, casting soft light across my messy backyard. Boxes of decorations, half-strung lights, and an assortment of party supplies littered the grass, but I barely noticed. My mind was focused, locked on the moment when I would submit the permit and hold the official power that had once seemed impossible. I felt unstoppable, not because I was breaking rules, but because I had learned them, mastered them, and was now using them to create something beautiful. I took a deep breath, realizing that the battle had already begun. The HOA might think they had control, but they didn't know me. They didn't know my persistence, my creativity, or my willingness to fight for what was right. And tomorrow, when I officially took over the permit, everything would change. The excitement bubbled inside me, making my hands tremble, my heart race, and a small, victorious smile curl across my face. This was no longer just a party. It was a statement, a challenge, a triumph waiting to happen, and I was ready. By the time the sun was high in the sky, I had a plan forming, precise and unstoppable. I could feel it in my bones, the excitement, the tension, the electric thrill of knowing I was about to turn the tables. This wasn't just a party anymore. It was a carefully orchestrated dance, a legal chess match with the HOA as my unsuspecting opponent. And the best part? I had all the moves and they didn't see a single one coming. I laid out every step on my kitchen table, using notebooks, pens, and a laptop that now seemed like a weapon. Step 1, gather all documents proving my property ownership and compliance with city codes. Step 2, fill out the permit application meticulously, leaving no room for dispute. Step 3, submit it as soon as possible, ensuring the city processed it before the HOA could even blink. Step 4 was the grand reveal. The moment when the permit officially became mine, and the HOA would realize they had been outsmarted. Even as I planned, doubt tried to creep in. What if the HOA caught wind of my actions? What if they tried to intimidate the city clerk or claim some loophole of their own? My stomach twisted at the thought. I could almost hear their smug voices, imagining that they were in control while I scrambled to fix a mistake. But then I shook my head, reminding myself I had done the research. I had prepared every form, every signature, every tiny requirement. This time I was untouchable. Neighbors started trickling by, curious about the movement in my backyard. Some peered over fences, eyes wide with anticipation. A few offered quiet words of encouragement. "You got this," one whispered. Another laughed, saying, "You're really doing it, huh?" Their excitement fueled me. I realized that this plan wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who wanted a little freedom in this suffocating, rule-heavy neighborhood. I wasn't just throwing a party, I was making a statement. I even rehearsed the confrontation I imagined with the HOA board. I could picture their faces as I would walk up to them, permit in hand, smiling calmly while they sputtered in disbelief. Every argument they could make, I had countered in my mind. Every objection I had anticipated, every question rehearsed. By the time I finished packing and talking to myself in the empty living room, I felt prepared not just to submit paperwork, but to win a small, personal victory that would feel huge. Late that afternoon, I finally typed the last line, double-checked every attachment, and hovered my finger over the submit button. My heart raced. This was the moment of truth. With a deep breath, I hit send, and instantly felt a mixture of exhilaration and anxiety. The paperwork was now officially in the hands of the city. There was nothing more to do but wait, and that waiting was torture. I paced the backyard again, looking at the string lights and half-hung decorations. Everything felt charged with energy, as if the air itself was buzzing in anticipation of the coming night. Every shadow, every sound seemed amplified. And then I thought about the HOA, sitting comfortably in their office, certain that I would fail or fold under pressure. The thought made me grin. They had no idea what was coming. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt ready. Tomorrow, when the permit was confirmed, the entire neighborhood would witness it. Their rules, their control, their authority, all irrelevant in the face of preparation, knowledge, and determination. I allowed myself a brief moment of pride. I wasn't just planning a party, I was planning a triumph. And as night fell, I couldn't help but whisper to myself, let them come. Let them try to stop me. Because tomorrow they're going to realize something they never expected, that sometimes being smart, patient, and brave is the ultimate party trick. The morning of the party arrived like a storm on the horizon, bright, tense, and full of promise. I woke up before the sun, heart pounding, mind racing. Today wasn't just a party. Today was the moment everything I had planned would either come to life or crash before it even began. Every light, every decoration, every single detail had to be perfect, because once the HOA saw what I had done, there would be no turning back. I stepped into the backyard, taking it all in. The string lights shimmered in the early light, tables were covered with freshly pressed cloths, and music equipment stood ready to make the night unforgettable. Yet the most important piece, the permit, was officially mine. I held it in my hands like a secret weapon. Every word on that document felt like a victory etched in ink. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that preparation, persistence, and a little courage could turn the impossible into reality. By mid-morning, I began setting up with precision, moving quickly but carefully, checking every detail. I could feel the tension in the air, a quiet electricity that seemed to hum in the grass. Neighbors started appearing, drawn by curiosity, excitement, or maybe just the thrill of rebellion. Whispers of encouragement reached me. "We're counting on you," one said, while another laughed. "This is going to be epic." I smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. I wasn't just throwing a party. I was creating an experience, a statement, a moment they would never forget. Then I saw them, HOA representatives approaching in their crisp shirts and clipped expressions. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to stay calm. They walked up as if they owned the place, like they could intimidate me with a glance. One of them cleared his throat and said, "We received reports about your party. This is highly irregular." I took a deep breath, holding the permit up like a shield. "Actually," I said, voice steady and calm, "it's completely legal. The permit is in my name, issued by the city this morning. All your concerns have been addressed." I watched them freeze. Their expressions shifted from confidence to disbelief, then frustration. They flipped through their own copies of rules and letters, but nothing could counter the document in my hands. The city had already signed off. Every argument they could make evaporated in that moment, leaving only stunned silence. Meanwhile, neighbors began trickling into the backyard, their excitement palpable. Music started quietly, then louder, filling the space with energy and anticipation. Children ran between tables, friends laughed over drinks, and I could feel the joy spreading through the crowd like wildfire. I glanced back at the HOA representatives, standing awkwardly by the fence, unsure where to sit, how to react, or if they should even stay. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing them powerless, their authority undone by my careful planning and knowledge of the rules. I didn't gloat, not really. I simply smiled, knowing that justice in its simplest form had been served. The backyard was alive with energy, laughter, and celebration, proof that rules don't always have to be chains, and that sometimes courage and preparation can create freedom. By evening, the party was in full swing. Lights shimmered above, music pulsed through the air, and the smell of grilled food made everyone's mouths water. The HOA representatives lingered on the edges, unsure how to navigate a space where their power no longer mattered. Every cheer, every laugh, every toast felt like a victory not just for me, but for anyone who had ever felt trapped by unnecessary rules or control. I took a moment to stand back, watching my neighbors enjoy themselves, the glow of lights reflecting in their eyes. I felt a deep, satisfying warmth, not just from the party itself, but from knowing that determination, knowledge, and a refusal to back down had made this moment possible. The battle had been fought, the victory claimed, and joy, real, unfiltered joy, was the reward. And as I looked across the backyard, lights flickering and laughter echoing, I whispered to myself, "This is why you never give up. This is why you fight smart. And tonight, this is why you celebrate like a winner." By the time the sun sank below the rooftops, the backyard had transformed into something magical. Lights twinkled like stars caught in a spider's web, music pulsed through the air, and the scent of grilled food made every neighbor's stomach rumble with anticipation. This wasn't just a party, it was a rebellion, a celebration of freedom, and a proof that careful planning and courage could topple even the most stubborn rules. I watched as my neighbors laughed, danced, and mingled. Every cheer, every clink of glasses, every burst of laughter felt like validation, not just for me, but for everyone who had felt trapped by the HOA's endless restrictions. The energy was electric, buzzing in every corner of the yard, and I couldn't help but smile. For weeks, the HOA had tried to control me to cage my joy, and yet here they were, powerless, watching as I transformed their rules into my victory. The HOA representatives lingered at the edge of the party, stiff and uncomfortable like fish out of water. One of them tried to raise their voice, attempting to enforce rules that no longer applied. "Excuse me, you can't," they began, only for a neighbor to laugh loudly and interrupt. Actually, you can't stop this. The permit is official, sir." I caught their flustered glance, a mix of disbelief and humiliation. It was almost poetic. They had spent weeks thinking they controlled the situation, thinking they could dictate my life, and now all of that authority was meaningless. They couldn't find me, they couldn't shut me down, and the harder they tried to assert themselves, the more ridiculous they looked. The music swelled, and I couldn't resist joining the dance floor with a few friends. Laughter erupted as someone tried karaoke for the first time, hitting notes that made windows rattle and neighbors cheer. A couple of children ran between tables, chasing each other under strings of lights, their giggles filling the air like a soundtrack to freedom. The energy was contagious, and even the hesitant neighbors who had been watching from the sidelines eventually joined in. Throughout it all, I couldn't stop stealing glances at the HOA members. Their attempts to assert control were laughably feeble. One of them tried to ask a question about noise restrictions, only to be drowned out by the cheers from the crowd. Another muttered under their breath, clearly trying to convince themselves that they weren't losing, even as the evidence of their failure surrounded them. At one point, a neighbor came up and whispered, "You really did it, you actually beat them." I felt a wave of pride wash over me. It wasn't arrogance, it was pure, unfiltered satisfaction. For once, the little guy had won. The rules weren't a cage, they were a challenge, and I had met it head-on. As the night went on, I took a moment to step back and observe. Lights reflected in smiling faces, conversations buzzed in every corner, and the music carried the laughter of everyone who had secretly wanted this moment. My backyard wasn't just a party space, it had become a statement, a triumph, a reminder that joy, when pursued with courage and preparation, could never be taken away by bureaucracy or fear. Even as the HOA members shuffled toward the edge, clearly uncomfortable, the party only grew louder and more spirited. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. They had underestimated me, underestimated the power of knowledge, and underestimated the will of a determined homeowner. Tonight, they were spectators, and I was the maestro conducting the symphony of celebration. And as the night sky stretched above us, filled with stars and the soft glow of string lights, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just about a party. It wasn't just about beating the HOA. It was about proving to myself, and to everyone watching, that persistence, planning, and courage could overcome even the most ridiculous obstacles. Tonight, my backyard wasn't just alive with music, laughter, and light. It was alive with triumph. The morning after the party should have been peaceful, a quiet aftermath to the chaos and laughter of the night before. But in my neighborhood, peace rarely lasted when the HOA was involved. I woke to a flurry of emails, letters slipped under my door, and the faint sound of neighbors whispering as they walked by. The HOA wasn't done. Far from it. They had realized that their authority had been challenged, and now they were determined to make an example of me. I opened the first email, already knowing what it would say. Threats, complaints, and the usual legal jargon meant to intimidate me. But instead of panic, I felt a rush of calm. I had documented everything, kept copies of the permit, photos of the setup, witness statements from neighbors. I had prepared for this moment, anticipated their moves, and now I was ready to respond, not with anger, but with clarity and confidence. As I read through the letters, I could almost picture the HOA board members sitting in their office, frustrated that their attempts to control me had failed. I smiled to myself. They wanted drama, confrontation, and surrender. Instead, they were getting preparation, logic, and an immovable resolve. I drafted a response, polite but firm, referencing city regulations, permit confirmations, and legal clauses they had overlooked. Every word was precise, calculated, and designed to leave them no room to argue. Still, doubt tried to creep in. Could they escalate further? Could they somehow find a loophole I hadn't anticipated? My hands trembled slightly as I reread the emails, but then I remembered the faces of my neighbors during the party, the laughter, the cheers, the joy that had filled every corner of my backyard. That was my proof. That was my strength. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of paper or a right to throw a party. I was fighting for joy, for community, and for the principle that rules should protect, not oppress. By mid-morning, I decided to visit the city office just to make sure everything was airtight. The clerk greeted me with a knowing smile, clearly aware of the situation. "Everything looks good," she said. "You're completely covered. The HOA can't touch this now." Relief washed over me, but I didn't relax entirely. The HOA could still make noise, cause tension, or try to intimidate neighbors. I had to stay vigilant. As I returned home, I noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. Conversations hushed when HOA members approached. Neighbors would peek from behind curtains, some smiling, others shaking their heads. It was clear the word had spread. My party, my victory, had shaken the HOA more than anyone expected. I felt a surge of pride, but also a strange sense of responsibility. This wasn't over. The HOA had learned a lesson, but I had to ensure it stuck, without turning into petty conflict or unnecessary drama. That evening, I organized a small follow-up gathering. Not a party, just a casual meetup. I wanted to show that my goal wasn't to humiliate anyone, but to reclaim a sense of fairness. Neighbors trickled in, sharing stories from the previous night, laughter spilling over fences and through the air. Even those who had been skeptical or neutral before seemed to be drawn into the energy. It was a reminder that community, once given freedom, could thrive in ways bureaucracy never could control. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the HOA. They tried subtle tactics, emails, hints at fines, veiled warnings, but nothing worked. I responded calmly, methodically, and legally every time. Each attempt they made to assert control only highlighted how powerless they had become. And with every failed effort, I felt a quiet, vindicated satisfaction. Not vengeance, not arrogance, just the fulfillment of proving that courage, preparation, and persistence could overcome authority misused. By the end of the day, I realized something important. This was bigger than a party, bigger than the HOA, bigger than rules or permits. It was a lesson in standing your ground, in knowing your rights, and in celebrating life even when forces try to cage it. And as I stood on my porch, watching neighbors smile, laugh, and talk freely, I knew that victory wasn't about being right. It was about inspiring others to claim their own small victories in life. And in that quiet, powerful moment, I smiled. The HOA could rage, complain, and try to intimidate all they wanted. I had already won. By the time the final night fell over the neighborhood, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Weeks of planning, tension, legal research, and anticipation had led to this moment. My backyard, once just a patch of grass and string lights, had become a symbol, not of rebellion, not of defiance, but a victory earned through preparation, courage, and patience. I walked outside, taking in the scene one last time. The lights shimmered gently, reflecting off glasses and plates, laughter still floating in the air. Neighbors lingered in clusters, chatting, smiling, and sharing stories from the party that had become the talk of the entire block. Children ran between tables, chasing shadows and giggles, their excitement untainted by the world of rules and regulations that usually suffocated this neighborhood. I glanced toward the HOA members, now sitting awkwardly near the edge of the yard. Their stiff expressions, once filled with confidence and authority, had softened into something else. Resignation, maybe even a little respect. They realized that all their attempts to control the situation had failed, and that their rules could not stop what careful planning and knowledge could achieve. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. This party, this victory, wasn't just about a permit or a backyard celebration. It was about standing up when someone tried to dictate your life. It was about proving, not with anger or confrontation, but with preparation and calm determination, that rules are tools, not chains. I had taken their threats, their letters, and their arrogance, and turned them into fuel for something extraordinary. Neighbors came over, offering quiet thanks or laughing as they recounted moments from the night. One whispered, "You really did it. You didn't just throw a party, you won." Another laughed and said, "We'll never look at HOA rules the same way again." Their words made my chest swell, not with pride alone, but with a deep, satisfying warmth. This wasn't just a personal win. It was a shared triumph for everyone who had felt the weight of unnecessary restrictions in this neighborhood. Even the HOA members approached eventually, cautiously, as if unsure whether to congratulate me or retreat into embarrassment. One of them finally spoke, voice careful. I suppose you followed all the rules." I smiled, holding the permit in my hand like a quiet badge of honor. "Yes," I said softly, "and I did it legally. That's all it took." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had tried to control the situation with fear, threats, and endless regulations. I had won not by defying them, but by understanding the rules better than they ever did. And in that realization, there was a lesson deeper than any victory or party could provide. Knowledge is power, courage is strength, and preparation is everything. I stepped back, watching the crowd laugh, dance, and celebrate. The lights twinkled, reflecting in every smiling face. For a moment, I allowed myself to fully savor the scene, the joy, the freedom, the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. I knew the HOA would grumble, send letters, maybe even try petty complaints in the future, but none of it mattered. Tonight, the victory was complete. The party had not only happened, it had triumphed over control, over fear, and over the unnecessary restrictions that tried to cage it. As the night grew quiet, neighbors began saying their goodbyes, hugs were exchanged, and laughter lingered like a gentle echo. I stood alone for a moment, looking up at the sky, the soft glow of string lights around me. I realized something important. Victory isn't about proving someone wrong. Victory is about proving to yourself that you can rise above, that you can stand tall even when forces seem insurmountable, and that you can create joy and freedom in your own way. And as I closed the gate, the night air cool against my skin, I whispered to myself, "This is why you fight smart. This is why you stand up for yourself. And this is why joy is worth every ounce of effort." Because in the end, it wasn't just a party. It was a statement, a celebration, and a triumph that no rule, no HOA, and no obstacle could ever take away. And I knew with quiet certainty that this victory and this lesson would stay with me forever. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.